The top story on ABC News Breakfast. Labor MPs are questioning the Prime Minister's judgment after she decided to appear in a Four Corners report about the leadership coup.
In an interview with the program, Julia Gillard denied she'd been plotting to overthrow Kevin Rudd weeks before it happened. The program claimed Ms Gillard's office had prepared a victory speech 2 weeks before she challenged Mr Rudd.
For more, Melissa Clark joins us now from Canberra. Good morning, Melissa. Not even 12 hours on and the fallout's already begun.
What we have is at least some Labor MPs questioning why Julia Gillard ever agreed to be involved in this Four Corners program that looked at Kevin Rudd and his position now and his position through that leadership change. And while the revelations of that program weren't particularly startling or game-changing, that Julia Gillard, or at least her speechwriters, had been preparing a victory speech well before the night of that leadership coup, and other talks about who had seen what internal polling when, they don't substantially change things. But the fact that Kevin Rudd hadn't given an interview and then Julia Gillard did, it has made the story so much more about Julia Gillard. So there is a question about why she agreed to do it and the way she handled the interview once she did it. Why she agreed to do it, well, we can't know. We can presume that perhaps she didn't want to leave a section or a side of the story untold in this profile, which had been heavily promoted, and it wasn't clear until the last minute whether or not Kevin Rudd would indeed grant Four Corners an interview. Turns out he didn't. Julia Gillard did, and there were some very tetchy moments that Four Corners highlighted where it didn't portray the Prime Minister in the most positive light. We've got an example of that, of when she's answering questions about what her speechwriters were up to and how much she knew and how much she had planned in advance of this leadership changeover. Let's hear some of that exchange.
I am not surprised that whether it's people in my office or people more broadly in the government or the Labor Party were casting in their mind where circumstances might get to. Of course, political people look at political circumstances and they think about where they might go to.
With respect, you haven't answered the question, and the question was, did you know that people in your office 2 weeks before Kevin Rudd was removed as Prime Minister were preparing a speech that you subsequently delivered?
I've given you the best answer I can, which is I'm not surprised that there were people, around government who were, in their own mind.
But did you know?
Well, I did not ask for a speech to be prepared.
But were you aware that one was being prepared?
Look, I've just given the best answer I can to your question.
My question was simply whether or not
I heard your question and I've answered it.
You haven't answered the question.
Well, I've given you the answer I'm going to give you.
Now, Melissa, there's also some new polling data out today, and it's more bad news for Julia Gillard.
Well, what we have is this figure of who's being perceived as a better Prime Minister or who's doing a better job in the role. Whether it's Newspoll or Nielsen, it's been neck and neck for some time now. The last few weeks and months of polling have shown that changing, and it has changed again in this Newspoll. It's now showing that Tony Abbott leads Julia Gillard 40% to 37%. Just 2 weeks, those numbers were flipped exactly. Now, that's largely down to a move in the polls in an increase in the satisfaction rating for Tony Abbott's performance and a decrease in his satisfaction. That's where most of the movement is. There's very little movement, no movement outside of the margin of error when it comes to the primary and two-party preferred vote. So that better PM vote, although it's a small change, it is a significant one, having been flipped and coming as it has off the back of that Four Corners program. It doesn't make for a great 24 hours for Julia Gillard.
No, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it. Thanks very much, Melissa Clark.